The battle for Willow Creek. The morning the trouble started in Willow Creek was as peaceful as a Sunday sermon. Mist hung low over the pines, curling like a painter's dream across the backwoods. I was sitting on the porch with my father, Tom Carver, both of us nursing black coffee, the kind so thick it could wake a bear. Bacon grease still clung to our fingers from breakfast, and the world felt right. That is, until we walked out to check the hunting blinds we'd built with our own hands, blinds that had stood for 3 generations and found nothing but flattened grass where they used to be. It wasn't vandalism. It wasn't a storm. The blinds were gone, erased like they'd never existed. Wood, sweat, and memories all vanished before the sun burned off the fog. I looked at Dad, expecting him to explode. Tom Carver wasn't known for holding his tongue. Around Willow Creek, folks still talked about how he'd chained himself to a bulldozer in '89 to stop a strip mall from eating up the old oak grove, or how he'd once rigged a fake toll booth on his driveway and collected $42 before the sheriff made him stop. To me, though, he was just Dad gruff, principled, the kind of man who'd rather lose a finger than a fight. But that morning, he didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just spat into the fire pit and said, "Time to show him what a real fight tastes like." That's when I knew it was serious. When Dad got quiet, trouble wasn't far behind. My wife, Ellen, found the note later, duct taped to our mailbox like some smug little trophy. It was from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, signed by Marcus Tate, the HOA president who'd made it his mission to turn our slice of Tennessee into a gated suburb. Marcus was the kind of guy who'd correct your pronunciation of charcuterie and call the cops if your mailbox leaned a half-inch off plumb. The note said our blinds were unauthorized structures on community property and had been removed as part of the HOA's Naturalization and Beautification Initiative. It was a violation, not just of our property, but of our history. Those blinds weren't just plywood and nails, they were carved with initials going back to my great-grandfather in the 50s. They were where I'd learned to hunt, to wait, to listen to the woods. Ellen read the note, her lips tightening with every word. She didn't curse either, just handed it to Dad. He scanned it once, his eyes narrowing, then folded it into his pocket. "Marcus Tate," he said, like he was naming a disease. That night, he disappeared into the garage for hours. When he came out, he was dressed in caminot, the trendy kind, but the real stuff, Vietnam era, with buckles and patches you couldn't buy anymore. In one hand, he held an old pulley system he'd once used to hoist deer. In the other, a wrench that looked like it could crack a skull. I tried to ask what he was up to, but he just gave me that sideways look, like I'd asked him how to whistle. "They drew first blood, Jack," he said. "Now I'm going to teach him about balance." I didn't know what balance meant then. I figured it was one of his cryptic sayings, the kind he'd drop when he wanted you to shut up and trust him. Turns out, balance meant hauling a 350-pound HOA golf cart, the one Marcus used to patrol the neighborhood, up into the branches of a 60-foot oak behind the community pool. He did it with the pulley, a winch off his truck, and some modified deer straps. No damage to the cart, just a slow, deliberate lift until it hung 20 feet in the air, spinning in the dawn breeze like a piñata for giants. The next morning, I woke to the sound of shouting, not scared shouting, but the indignant, HOA brand kind, like someone had audited their soul and found it wanting. I stepped onto the porch, a half-eaten bagel in hand, and saw a crowd under the oak. Cell phones were out, snapping pictures. Marcus was pacing beneath the cart, his face redder than a July tomato, looking like his whole world had been hung up to dry. When he spotted Dad standing at the tree line, arms folded, I swear I saw fear in his eyes for the first time. Sheriff Harlan Brooks rolled up 15 minutes later. He took one look at the cart, sighed, and walked over to Dad like this wasn't the strangest thing he'd seen that week. "Tom, please tell me this was a twister," he said. Dad, deadpan as ever, replied, "Freak updraft, Harlan. Darn thing just floated up there." They couldn't prove anything. Dad hadn't left fingerprints, and no one had seen him. So Marcus and the HOA went the coward's route, paperwork. They filed a complaint for unauthorized vertical vehicle placement and slapped us with a $10,000 fine for unapproved lift equipment. The wording was so absurd, even Harlan chuckled when he handed us the envelope. But for Dad, this wasn't about fines. It was about principle, memory, the land we'd fought for, and the blinds we'd bled into. Every move Marcus made just added fuel to the fire. The local paper got wind of it and ran a headline. Retiree hoists HOA's power literally. Neighbors started talking. Some were mad. The ones who wore matching Christmas sweaters and mowed their lawns with rulers. But others, the ones who'd been fined for planting non-approved roses or flying flags Marcus didn't like, started slipping us pies and flashing thumbs-ups at stop signs. We weren't alone anymore. Ellen tried to play peacemaker, inviting the HOA board for coffee, offering to rebuild the blinds farther from the property line, even suggesting mediation. But when Marcus laughed and said, "We'll be taking your chicken coop next," something snapped. That night, Dad pulled down the attic ladder and said we were going hunting not for deer, but for something bigger. I didn't know what he meant, but the look in his eyes was half storm, half mischief. You don't erase a man's legacy without expecting him to rewrite your rules. And in Willow Creek, the rules were about to change. The golf cart dangling from the oak was just the opening shot in what became a full-blown war between our family and the Willow Creek HOA. Marcus Tate, with his pressed khakis and cologne that smelled like a department store, thought he could bury us under fines and bylaws. He didn't know Dad Tom Carver wasn't the type to fold. If anything, Marcus's smugness just lit a bigger fire under him. But it wasn't just Dad fighting now. The whole neighborhood was starting to pick sides, and the air in Willow Creek crackled with tension. The morning after the cart incident, flyers appeared on every mailbox, printed in Comic Sans like a passive-aggressive middle finger. They announced stricter enforcement of all HOA bylaws due to recent acts of community disruption. Marcus didn't name Dad, but he didn't have to. Everyone knew who the target was. The fire department eventually lowered the cart, treating it like a priceless artifact, roping off the area while 3 pool moms and visors complained about their ruined tanning schedules. Marcus stood at a distance, arms crossed, his smirk saying he thought he'd won. He hadn't. The HOA hit us with a $10,000 fine for endangerment of community property, and, a few days later, our water stopped running. The official excuse was a suspected leak in the line to our property, but no one else in Willow Creek had a problem, and no repair crew showed up. Dad didn't blink. He hauled out his old rain barrels and started collecting water like it was the apocalypse. Ellen, who'd always been the calm one, called every county office from the water board to the EPA. They passed her around like a hot potato, each one blaming the other until she drove to the HOA office herself. She came back with a clenched jaw and cheeks redder than a barn, refusing to repeat what Marcus had said, only muttering that if he didn't back off, she'd forget her manners for a solid 15 minutes. The neighbors changed too. Folks who used to wave now avoided eye contact. Some had reasons, jobs tied to HOA contracts or fear of fines, but others just believed rules mattered more than people. One woman, Mrs. Langley, let her yappy terrier defecate on our porch and stared me down while it squatted, like she was claiming our welcome mat for the HOA. When I told Dad, he didn't say a word. He just went to his shed and came back with a tube of glitter and an old pressure trigger. That was the start of what I now call the prank war. Dad's first move was a decoy outhouse, built in 2 days and planted right where the HOA landscapers cut through to the drainage ditch. It looked real crescent moon on the door, fake compost bucket, the works, but inside was a motion-triggered glitter bomb. The next Monday, a young landscaper named Ricky opened the door and vanished in a cloud of gold sparkles. He came out looking like a disco ball, quit on the spot, and didn't come back. Then came the fake coyote invasion. Dad borrowed some taxidermy props from a buddy at the VFW and set them up in Marcus's front yard, complete with overturned trash cans and a Bluetooth speaker playing growling noises every few minutes. Marcus called animal control 3 times before he realized the coyotes weren't moving. The HOA fought back dirty. Someone spray-painted "Redneck Rebels" on our mailbox in neon green. Dad didn't flinch, painted over it with wood stain, and added a grinning skull to the flag. But beneath the chaos, something bigger was brewing. While Dad waged his guerrilla campaign, Ellen and I started digging into the history of our land. She remembered her grandfather mentioning old land grants, and sure enough, in the attic, we found dusty boxes filled with hand-drawn maps, notarized deeds, and a leather-bound journal that looked like it had survived a war. The journal was a goldmine. It detailed when our property was first marked in the 1920s, how the boundaries were set, and, most importantly, that the woods behind our house were labeled a family easement, exempt from any association's control. The HOA didn't exist when our blinds were built, meaning Marcus had no legal right to touch Themer to fine us, harass us, or set foot on our land. The catch was, we needed legal confirmation, and we couldn't trust anyone in Marcus's pocket. That's when Ellen remembered Walt Grayson, a retired land use attorney who'd been on the HOA board until Marcus pushed him out for being uncooperative with progress. Walt lived 2 towns over in a cabin that smelled like pipe smoke and regret. When we showed up, he answered the door in a bathrobe, holding a butter knife like a sword until Ellen explained who we were. At the mention of Dad's name, he sighed. If this is about the skunk incident, tell Tom I still check my shoes every morning. Ellen swore it wasn't, though I made a mental note to ask Dad about that later. We spread the maps and deeds on Walt's coffee table. He flipped through them, chuckling before we even got to the journal. This map predates the HOA charter by 25 years, he said, adjusting his glasses. And it's notarized. If I take this to county court, Marcus is toast. They'll have to undo everything they've done to your land. But there was a catch. I'll help, Walt said. But only if Tom comes here and apologizes in person. No excuses, no jokes. He knows what he did. We went home and told Dad. He sat there, sipping coffee, staring into the woods like he was waiting for a ghost to walk out. Then he said something I didn't expect. Fine. If it saves the land, I'll do it. But I'm bringing a pie. I asked what kind. He didn't answer, just grinned and headed to the kitchen. That night, he baked a peach pie with a crust so intricate it could have hung in a gallery. I watched him carve a tiny coyote into the center. No one said a word. The next day, we loaded into the truck deed folder in hand, pie on the seat, and the future of our land riding with us. Dad showed up at Walt's cabin looking like he was headed to a funeral, wearing his cleanest flannel and boots polished to a shine. Walt opened the door, eyeing the pie like it might be rigged. Dad cleared his throat and said, I was wrong to use a stuffed skunk to make a point. That was it. Walt blinked, took the pie, sniffed it like a bomb tech, and gave a nod so small it barely counted. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was enough. Walt got to work like a man possessed. The next day, he filed an injunction against the HOA's actions, citing historic deed protections and boundary violations. Within 48 hours, the county clerk issued a temporary stop on all HOA enforcement against our property. For the first time in weeks, we could breathe. But the real fight was Kaminga Public Hearing at the Willow Creek Community Center, the same place Marcus had once banned wind chimes for being too melodic. The room was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even a woman scribbling notes for a book she called The Rebel of the Pines. I don't think Dad heard her, but he'd have liked the title. Marcus walked in with 2 board members and a lawyer who looked like she'd been starched into her suit. He tried to give a speech about community standards, but Walt cut him off with a wave of the map. The room went silent as Walt laid out the history, the deed, the easement, the illegality of the HOA's land grab. It was a slaughter. Marcus turned colors I didn't know existed. He tried to object, but the county judge, brought in to mediate, shut him down like a faulty engine. Then Dad stood up. He walked to the front, tipped his cap, and said, I ain't got fancy words, but this land's been ours since before most of y'all were born. You don't erase a man's roots to make your future prettier. You just get a fake future in a fight you won't win. It wasn't lawyer talk, but it hit harder than anything Walt said. Even the judge cracked a smile. People clapped some who'd never liked Dad before. The decision came fast. The HOA's claim was nullified, the fines dropped, and the golf cart incident was sealed under a community misunderstanding clause. Dad said it made him feel sneaky in a good way. But the fallout didn't end there. Walt's digging uncovered that Marcus had been rewriting bylaws without votes and funneling landscaping contracts to his cousin. Once that hit the public record, the HOA crumbled. A petition to dissolve it started circulating, and neighbors who'd stayed quiet began speaking up stories of fines for unapproved birdhouses or kids' swing sets that weren't aesthetic. On a sweaty Saturday, 218 residents showed up to vote. 180 said ditch the HOA. The rest abstained or voted no, mostly the ones who called their dogs fur babies and drank oat milk lattes. Willow Creek was free. The air in Willow Creek felt lighter after the HOA's collapse. It was like the whole neighborhood exhaled, and for the first time in years, People acted like they lived in a community, not a prison camp. Flags of every kind, American, Tennessee, even a pirate one, popped up on lawns. Garden gnomes and flamingos reappeared, and someone parked a giant inflatable T-Rex in their yard, wearing a party hat. Nobody said a word. The woods behind our house stayed quiet for a few days, almost like they were soaking in the victory. Then one morning, a buck wandered near the old blind site, nibbling at the grass. Dad watched it from the porch and said it was a sign. I just figured it knew it was safe again. Rebuilding the blinds became a family project. Ellen sketched designs, blending Dad's old-school methods with her knack for eco-friendly materials. I filmed the whole thing, thinking it'd be a keepsake for my kids someday. We used reclaimed lumber, weathered to match the trees, and carved our initials next to those of my great-grandfather and his father. It felt like we were stitching history back together. I put together a short video about it for a local history contest, figuring a few friends might watch it. Within a week, it went viral, racking up 1 million views. People called it the Pine Rebellion. Dad became a meme, my favorite being a Photoshop of him lifting the golf cart like a bodybuilder with the caption, "When HOAs push too far." We started getting letters, some weird, like a guy from Montana offering Dad a podcast deal, others heartfelt, from folks who'd fought their own HOA battles. The biggest surprise came when Marcus Tate showed up at our property line, not in his golf cart, which had been quietly retired, but on foot, wearing camo with the tags still on. He carried a folding chair and a box of donuts, looking like a man trying to remember how to be human. Dad spotted him from the blind we'd just rebuilt and tapped my shoulder. We watched Marcus wave awkwardly, then shout, "If it's not too late, I'd like to learn how to hunt." Dad looked at me, then back at Marcus. The silence stretched long enough to make the squirrels twitch. Then Dad nodded. "Only if you bait." Marcus grinned, holding up a bag of deer corn. "Already did." That afternoon, we sat 3 across in the blind, me, Dad, and the man who'd once tried to erase us. The quiet wasn't awkward, just new. Every few minutes, we'd scan the trees, waiting for movement. As dusk settled, a squirrel skittered up the blind's edge, clutching something shiny. Dad leaned forward, squinting. "That what I think it is?" It was the old HOA seal, pried off their office door. The squirrel dropped it at Dad's feet, chattered twice, and bolted. Dad picked it up, turned it over, and chuckled. "Told you I trained him." We didn't say more. We just listened to the woods breathe. No rules, no fines, just peace. We thought that was the end, like some movie where the credits roll and everyone sips sweet tea on the porch. But Willow Creek didn't do tidy endings. A few weeks later, whispers started at the hardware store, talk that the county was eyeing our land now that the HOA was gone. Then came the letters, not from Marcus, but from the County Development Board. They used fancier words, talking about assessing growth zones and administrative restructuring, but it boiled down to one thing. They wanted to bulldoze parts of the woods for high-end condos and a strip mall. Dad read the first letter, crumpled it, and tossed it in the fire pit. "They didn't learn a damn thing," he muttered. Ellen looked like she'd been hit with a brick. After everything, the blinds, the hearing, the vote, now the county was coming for us. This wasn't about rules or aesthetics anymore. It was about money, and that was a beast with sharper claws. A meeting was set for the following Friday at the county annex building. Development board reps would be there, along with interested investors, suits with slick smiles and plans that started with nature trails and ended with Starbucks. Dad didn't say much that week, just started preparing in that quiet, dangerous way he had. He went through every document with Walt Grayson again, pulling blueprints, photographing animal tracks, even counting tree rings to prove the land was alive and irreplaceable. I started filming interviews with neighbors, collecting stories about the owls by the creek, the bobcat kids spotted one summer, the old hickory tree where someone's uncle carved his name before heading to Korea. The night before the meeting, Dad did something none of us saw coming. He walked to Marcus's house. Marcus, now in sweatpants and a community college hoodie, opened the door looking like he expected a prank. Dad just handed him a folder. "If you meant what you said in that blind," Dad told him, "you'll help us keep it safe." Marcus flipped through the maps inside, didn't say a word, just nodded. By morning, he'd called a few former HOA board members, and we had an unlikely alliance, old enemies standing together against a bigger threat. There's a strange unity that only shows up when the wolves come from outside. The annex building was packed. Suits filled the front row, flashing digital renderings of glass condos and cartoon families with perfect teeth. The development board spoke first, droning about modernizing rural spaces and economic opportunity. Their words were so polished they barely sounded human. Then the investors took over, clicking through slides about market potential and square footage. The room started tilting, like logic was drowning in their shiny promises. Then Dad stood up. He didn't bother with the mic, just walked to the front with a folder in one hand and a piece of bark in the other. "This land ain't empty," he said, voice steady. "It breathes. It raised us. You want to pave it because your spreadsheets say folks need more parking." He held up the bark, scratched with bare claws from 2 winters back, and passed it to the nearest board member like it was a murder weapon. "We got creatures out there older than your city plans. Trees older than your buildings. What you're trying to kill ain't just roots, it's history." Ellen went next, laying out the ecological value. Rare plants, migratory paths, a creek that fed half the county's aquifer. Then Marcus, of all people, stood up. He admitted he'd once seen the land as a mess to be tamed, but after sitting in our blind, watching the wind move the pines, he realized what he'd tried to erase. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, especially the reporter scribbling in the back. Walt sealed it, pointing out the county's ignored environmental loopholes in the deed's protections. The room turned. The developers shifted in their seats, some annoyed, others nervous. The judge overseeing the hearing, a no-nonsense woman named Clara Holt, asked one question. "Have any of you walked this land yourselves?" Silence. Not one suit had. That was the crack in their armor. Clara ordered a delay and an on-site review. No development could move forward until it was done. It wasn't a knockout, but it bought us time. Back home, we celebrated quietly, no fireworks, just a fire pit, a few beers, and an old Johnny Cash tape playing low. The woods felt thicker that night, like they knew they'd been fought for. Marcus stopped by, bringing venison jerky and a book on sustainable land use. He sat with us, not as a boss or a foe, but as a neighbor trying to learn. At one point, he asked Dad what came next. Dad looked at the trees and said, "Same thing as always. They'll come back, different name, new smile, same hunger." He cracked a beer and added, "And we'll still be here." The victory at the county annex felt like a deep breath after a long dive, but we knew it was only a pause, not an end. The woods of Willow Creek were safe for now, but Dad Tom Carver never trusted peace to last. He'd seen too many fights to believe the suits would just pack up and leave. Sure enough, a month later, trouble stirred again, quieter this time, like a snake in the grass. It started with a drone buzzing over our property one April morning, hovering low, making slow passes before zipping off toward the old logging road. Dad tracked it with his eyes, coffee mug in hand, and muttered, "Real estate vultures or zoning spies. Same difference." He wasn't wrong. A week later, a glossy magazine landed in our mailbox, addressed to Willow Creek residents. Inside were mock-ups of eco-luxury cabins nestled in pristine Appalachian forest. The cover showed our tree line, digitally tweaked to look like a postcard, with a couple sipping artisanal coffee outside a glass box they called a cabin. We spread it on the kitchen table, staring like it was a ransom note. Ellen broke the silence first. "They're coming back," she said. "Smarter now. No bulldozers, just money dressed up in green." It wasn't about rules, Anna Maria, it was about selling the soul of the land to weekend millionaires. And the worst part? Some folks might buy it. We called Walt Grayson, who'd been poking through county records. He'd noticed a string of quiet land purchases, mall lots near our woods, paid in cash by out-of-state LLCs with overlapping agent names. It was a slow creep, designed to build momentum before anyone caught on. But we weren't the same family Marcus Tate had blindsided a year ago. This time, Dad had a plan, one he called the Deep Root Initiative. It sounded lofty, but it was simple. Make the community so tied to the land that any attempt to take it would spark a firestorm no lawyer could douse. The Deep Root Initiative kicked off with Sunday trail walks, open to anyone who wanted to learn the woods. Dad led the first ones, teaching folks how to read deer tracks, spot edible plants, or just listen to the forest instead of stomping through it. Ellen joined in, talking about the creek's ecosystem and how it fed the county's water supply. A local herbalist named Sarah taught folk remedies, and, to everyone's surprise, Marcus Tate gave a half-decent talk on bird calls. I filmed it all, turning the footage into a digital archive called Voices of the Pines. It spread faster than we expected. Families drove from neighboring counties to walk our trails. Teachers brought students. Someone built a community map with QR codes linking to interviews with old-timers who'd hunted the land since the 60s. What started as defiance became a celebration. The woods weren't just something to say, they were something to belong to. Kids ran through the pines, laughing, while their parents learned the difference between a fox's bark and a hawk's cry. The trails got names, not from any official vote, but from stories. Bobcat Bend, Owl Hollow, Carver's Crossing. It was like the land was waking up, claiming its place in people's hearts. And that's when the developers made their move. They filed for a permit to start exploratory drilling on a parcel a mile from our trailhead, claiming it was for a geothermal study. We knew better. It was a test, a way to get their foot in the door. If we let it slide, they'd keep pushing until the woods were gone. So we didn't fight with lawsuits or picket signs. We fought with a story, a big one. We hosted the first Willow Creek Heritage Day, a mix of music, food, storytelling, and guided walks. We invited everyone, locals, reporters, lawmakers, even the county board members who'd been dodging our calls. We didn't just show them Dada showed them what the land meant, with banjo tunes, barbecue, and kids rolling down hills no developer had ever seen. Dad gave the final speech as dusk settled, standing by a bonfire with the pines looming behind him. He didn't shout, just told the story of the land from the first blind he'd built with his father to the day a squirrel dropped the HOA's seal like a trophy. Some things are worth more than a check with a lot of zeros, he said. This land's one of them. By the end, even the county commissioner, a man who looked like he'd been born in a suit, was wiping his eyes. 2 weeks later, the drilling permit was rescinded, citing unforeseen community engagement. Translation: they knew we wouldn't quit. The celebration that night was quiet, just us and a few neighbors by the fire pit. Marcus showed up with a six-pack and a shy grin, asking Dad how to spot a deer's rub. It was strange, seeing the man who'd once fined us for unapproved wind chimes now trying to learn the woods. But it felt right, like a wound starting to heal. I started thinking about what we'd built, not just the blinds, but a community that remembered what mattered. I kept filming, turning the trail walks and Heritage Day into a YouTube series. One video, of Dad showing how to track deer with nothing but a gum wrapper and wind direction, hit 5 million views. Sponsors called. A publisher offered Dad a book deal, which he laughed off unless they'd put the squirrel on the cover. But just when things felt settled, a new shadow fell. A lawyer from a conservation trust showed up unannounced, all polished shoes and a briefcase that cost more than our tractor. He represented a foundation that wanted to preserve heritage zones for future generations. Their offer: sign over stewardship of the woods to them, and they'd protect it for Averno condos, no malls, no roads. But there was a catch. No hunting, no fires, no blinds. The land would be untouched, monitored like a museum exhibit. Dad listened, stone-faced, then asked, "You ever held your breath till a deer walks past you?" The lawyer blinked, thrown off. Dad leaned forward. "That ain't untouched. That's a handshake. You walk soft, the woods let you in. You take care of it, it takes care of you. What you're offering is a cage." The lawyer left with a tight smile, promising to send paperwork. Dad said he'd use it for kindling. But the visit got me thinking. Everyone wanted to own the land: HOAs, developers, even do-gooders with their preservation plans. To them, it was a resource to control or a box to check. To us, it was a relationship, a living thing that carried our mistakes, our stories, our roots. So I started writing it all down, every tale Dad told, every lesson he'd taught me, with a nod or a scowl. The more I wrote, the more I saw that this wasn't about a golf cart or an HOA or even revenge. It was about what happens when someone refuses to be erased, when they plant their boots and say, "No further," not out of spite, but because they know what's worth keeping. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hickories, Dad called me to the edge of the woods. He held the old map, the one that had saved us, and handed it to me. "This ain't paper," he said. "It's memory. Keep it safe." I asked if he ever thought he'd be a folk hero. He snorted. "Hero? I just didn't feel like disappearing." I told him that's what heroes. Hey, remember so loud that forgetting's impossible. Later, a group of kids from the trail walks brought a sign they'd carved from a fallen pine. It read Carver's Woods and stood at the trailhead, right where the blind's path began. Dad ran his hand along the grain, tapped it twice, and said nothing. It was enough. Winter came early to Willow Creek that year, wrapping the woods in a hush that felt like the quiet after a good story, when no one wants to speak out of respect. The blinds stood tall again, their new lumber already graying to match the pines. Dad called it camouflage by time. Every morning, he'd sit on the porch, coffee in hand, staring into the trees like he was waiting for another fight to walk out of the mist. But beneath his gruff watchfulness, something new was growing, not anger or vengeance, but purpose. The battles with the HOA and the county had changed him, and they'd changed Willow Creek. The land wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd fought for it, and that fight wasn't over. It never really is. It started with the kids. Two boys from down the road, Ethan and Caleb, showed up one frosty morning with BB guns and eager eyes, asking if Dad could teach them to hunt. Not for fun, Ethan said, shuffling his feet. For real. To know where food comes from. Dad squinted at them, then at their guns, then back at them. He didn't answer right away, just sipped his coffee. Finally, he nodded. Be here before dawn. No gadgets. The next morning, they showed up, breath fogging in the cold. A week later, two more kids joined. Then a girl named Lily from the next town, her little brother in tow, and soon a whole pack of kids in mismatched camo, tripping over roots but listening harder than most adults ever did. Dad didn't lecture. He taught by doing, pointing at tracks, pausing to let the woods speak. They learned to move without being seen, to tell scat from prints, to hear the difference between a sparrow's chirp and a hawk's cry. He called it Pine School, and the name stuck. I kept filming, at first just for the archive, but it grew into something bigger. I started a YouTube channel, posting videos of Dad teaching the kids, sharing stories of the land, explaining how to live with it instead of over it. One clip Dad showing how to find a deer trail using wind patterns, and a snap twig hit 10 million views in 3 days. Suddenly, we had sponsors calling, magazines asking for interviews, even a literary agent pitching a book deal. Dad laughed so hard he nearly choked on his biscuit. A book, he said. Only if that squirrel gets a chapter. But the channel wasn't just about views. It was about legacy. Each video carried a piece of Willow Creek stories of the blinds, the fights, the people who'd stood up. We got letters from all over, from small towns where HOAs or developers had tried to erase history in the name of progress. A woman in Ohio wrote about her neighborhood's fight against a golf course. A man in Idaho sent a photo of his family's hunting cabin, saved because they'd watched our videos and learned how to dig up old deeds. One guy drove 6 hours just to shake Dad's hand, handing him a jar of homemade moonshine and saying, "You gave me the guts to stand my ground." The Deeproot initiative kept growing too. The Sunday trail walks turned into a weekly ritual, drawing crowds from across Tennessee. Ellen started leading sessions on native plants, while Marcus Tate, now a regular, taught kids how to spot all pellets. The woods became a classroom, a church, a town square. We built a website for Voices of the Pines, archiving interviews, maps, and photos. Schools used it for field trips. A local college offered to fund a permanent trail system, and we let them, as long as they didn't touch the blinds or pave a single inch. The land stayed wild, just as it should. But the past has a way of knocking when you least expect it. In late spring, as the creek thawed and the pines shook off their frost, a new threat emerged not from the county or developers, but from within. A group of newcomers, retirees who'd moved to Willow Creek for its rural charm, started grumbling about the trail walks. They liked the woods but wanted them organized, paved paths, signs, maybe a visitor center with a gift shop. They formed a community enhancement committee and pitched their plan at a town meeting, complete with PowerPoint slides and buzzwords like accessible tourism. It wasn't an HOA, but it smelled close enough. Dad sat in the back, arms crossed, while their leader, a woman named Diane who wore linen scarves and drank kombucha, talked about elevating Willow Creek's potential. I could see his jaw tighten when she suggested retiring the blinds to make the trails more inclusive. Ellen spoke first, calm but firm, explaining how the blinds were history, not obstacles. Marcus backed her up, saying the woods weren't a theme park, they were a living thing. But Diane's group had money and connections, and they weren't backing down. They started a petition, gathering signatures from folks who didn't know the land's story or didn't care. This time, we didn't fight with pranks or lawsuits. We fought with the truth. I edited a new video, a 20-minute documentary weaving together the HOA battle, the county hearing, and the Deeproot walks. It showed Dad teaching kids, Ellen mapping the creek, neighbors laughing at Heritage Day. I ended it with a shot of the Carver's Wood sign, the camera panning to the blinds as Dad's voice said, "This land remembers. Don't let it forget." I posted it with a call to action, come to the next town meeting and speak for the woods. The video hit 1 million views in 48 hours. Hashtags like Save Carver's Woods trended. Strangers shared it, from Nashville to New England. The meeting was standing room only. Diane's group went first, flashing their slides and talking about economic benefits. Then Dad stood up, holding the old map that had saved us twice before. "This ain't about money," he said. "It's about what lasts. These woods raised us. They taught us. You pave them. You don't just lose trees, you lose who we are." He passed the map to a kid from Pine School, who held it up like a flag. One by one, neighbors spoke, old-timers, new families, even a few of Diane's own supporters who'd changed their minds after the video. The kids from Pine School stole the show, reading letters they'd written about what the trails meant to them. Lily, the girl who joined first, said, "If you take the blinds, you take my grandpa's stories. I'm not giving those up." The vote was unanimous. No paving, no visitor center, no enhancements. Diane's group folded, and most of them joined the trail walks a few weeks later, scarves and all. The woods stayed wild, and the blinds stayed put. That night, we sat by the fire pit, the Carver's wood sign glowing in the flicker. Dad passed me a jar of sweet tea and said something I hadn't heard before. "I won't be here forever, Jack. But the woods will, if we do this right." I nodded, throat tight. "They remember," he added. "The fights, the hands that built, the voices that stood up. They remember the laughter and the quiet after. That's what makes a place sacred." The next morning, we found a squirrel perched on the blind, clutching a shiny button from Diane's scarf. It dropped it at Dad's feet and darted off. He laughed, tucking the button in his pocket. "That's 3 for 3, he said. We didn't need to say more. The woods had spoken, same as always. Willow Creek settled into a new normal after that wild, messy, and fiercely alive. Pine School grew, with kids teaching their parents what they'd learned. The trails stayed open, free, and unpaved. My videos kept spreading, carrying the story of the pines to places we'd never see. Dad never wrote that book, but he let me publish his stories online, each one a brick in the wall we'd built around the land. The fights didn't stop. There'd always be another developer, another committee, another plan. But we knew what we could do now, not just as a family, but as a community that remembered. The Carver's wood sign still stands, weathered but proud, at the trailhead. Every spring, the kids from Pine School touch it as they pass, like a ritual. The blinds are there too, initials carved deeper with each generation. And somewhere in the pines, that squirrel's probably plotting its next heist, carrying the last pieces of a battle most folks never knew was fought. In Willow Creek, nothing disappears, not blinds, not justice, not stories worth telling. We won because we told the truth so loud, no one could rewrite it. And as long as the pines stand, that truth will hold. Thank you for joining the journey of Willow Creek, a story of family, land, and the fight to hold on to what matters. The battles here weren't just about trees or blinds. They were about standing up to injustice, whether it came from an HOA, a county board, or even well-meaning newcomers. But they also raised tough questions. Was Dad's prank with the golf cart a step too far? Or was it the spark needed to wake the community? When does defiance become destruction? And when is it the only way to protect what's yours? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your take on violence, justice, and fighting for what's right. Have you faced your own Willow Creek moment? What did you do? And what would you do differently? Let's keep the conversation going. Your voice matters.